The new iPad Pro and iPad Air are finally here, both now coming with an 11 and 13-inch model, making the decision on what iPad you should buy actually more confusing than ever. Not only that, Apple dropped the price of the regular iPad to $350 and still has the mini in the lineup. So this is literally the biggest iPad lineup in history, with more choices and decisions to make than ever before. But don't worry, I'm here, Greg's got you covered. Just sit back, relax, and let me walk you through all the major differences between these iPad models, some mistakes that you should avoid to ensure you get the right model, and find out whether or not you should go for an iPad Air or an iPad Pro. First of all, let's start with the design and dimensions between the iPad Air and the Pro, because at first glance, they look the same. But don't be fooled, there's some really important differences here. First of all, the screen sizes on the Air are a bit of a lie. If you look further into Apple's comparison page, you'll see that the 13-inch Air measures in at the old 12.9-inch size, while the 11-inch iPad Air measures in at 10.86 inches. So Apple is rounding up here, but strangely enough, you won't have the same disclaimer on the iPad Pro because the bezels kind of shrunk a little bit, and that means that the 11 and 13-inch sizes are the correct measurements. Secondly, you would think that a product named iPad Air would be lighter than a product called iPad Pro. That's how it works in the MacBook lineup, but that's not how it works here in the iPad lineup. The iPad 11-inch Pro weighs in at 0.98 pounds, while the Air is a little heavier at 1.02 pounds. The same is true for the 13-inch version of the Air, which weighs 1.36 pounds, compared to the 13-inch iPad Pro, which weighs 1.28 pounds. Finally, the iPad Pro is now also thinner than the iPad Air. The Air comes in at 6.1 millimeters, while the iPad Pro is just 5.1 millimeters thin on the 13-inch version and 5.3 millimeters thin on the 11-inch version. This makes it not only the thinnest iPad ever, but the thinnest Apple product in history. This is the thinnest thing they've ever released. I know Johnny Ive is crying somewhere. In happiness, not in sadness. He's happy that it's thin. Now listen, these weight and depth differences aren't major, but for a product that is marketed as iPad Air, you might initially expect that the thinnest and lightest iPad would be the Air, and that's just not true. Also, I should mention that the iPad Pro now comes in two colors, a new darker space black color and the regular silver color, while the iPad Air comes in four colors, space gray, starlight, blue, and purple. A bigger difference that you need to pay attention to is the actual displays though, because they are wildly different, and it's the biggest gap we've had in iPad display technologies in quite some time. First of all, the Air is something we've seen before. It is pretty much the same as the previous iPad model display. Both the 11 and 13-inch version uses an LCD display running at 60 Hz with a maximum display brightness of 600 nits. Yes, even the 13-inch version of the Air does not get a ProMotion display. The iPad Pro, on the other hand, is getting a massive upgrade to the display, with Apple bringing in an OLED display for the first time ever on an iPad. And it's not just one OLED, it is a dual layer OLED screen, and this technology makes it one of the biggest and brightest OLED panels yet. So for full screen brightness, you get an impressive 1000 nits. For HDR content, you get 1600 nits of peak brightness with a 2,000,000:1 contrast ratio. What this means for you normal folks in layman's terms is that the display is going to be brighter. It's better for when you're using it in a brighter environment. The OLED display can turn off individual pixels, meaning better black levels, compared to the iPad Air's LCD display, which has to light up all the pixels, which can make, deep black scenes in like movies and stuff look a little washed out. And then overall, these OLED displays are just going to look a little more vivid. And unlike the Air, the Pro also gets the faster 120 Hz ProMotion display, so things like animation and scrolling will look smoother, and you might even be able to take advantage of faster refresh rate on high frame rate games and just have a more responsive Apple Pencil experience with lower latency. The ProMotion display is also adaptive, so it can drop between 120 Hz to 10 Hz, which means it can accurately portray the correct frame rate when watching different types of videos with different frame rates, or lower the refresh rate when the iPad display isn't active to help save on battery life. Not only that, but you can actually get a Nano-Texture display option on the iPad Pro for the first time that will help reduce harsh glares in really bright working environments for $100 more. The kicker here, though, is that this option is only available on the 1TB and 2TB models of the iPad Pro. Now, while there's a lot of differences between the Air and the Pro, I would say that this display is the #1 thing to consider when you're deciding whether or not you want to upgrade from the Air to the Pro. In my opinion, the biggest difference between these devices right now is the display, and really, when you look at all the major deciding factors, even though I have more differences coming up, this is really probably the one area you should look at on deciding between whether you want the Air or the Pro. But like I said, it's not the only difference, and in a shocking turn of events, Apple now has a bigger chip difference between these two iPads than the previous model. That's because Apple is skipping the M3 chip on the iPad Pro and bumping it straight up to the brand new M4 chip. The M4 chip comes with a lot of powerful upgrades, including a new 10-core CPU design, more memory bandwidth, and a powerful new 16-core neural engine that will be faster for tasks using AI capabilities now and possibly in the future. And hey, it is a big upgrade over the M2 chip. I mean, I'm still processing this. The M3 came out not too long ago, and now we're on M4, so I still have to process how much of a chip upgrade this is. But if we're looking at Apple's own kind of, specs here and their own results, which you can take with a bit of a grain of salt, they say the neural engine is twice as fast with 38 trillion operations per second compared to the M2's 15.8 trillion operations per second. And across the board, Apple just says the M4 chip is better. It has up to 1.5 times faster CPU performance over the M2, 1.2 times faster memory bandwidth, and up to 4 times faster 3D render performance. And it also has hardware accelerated ray tracing to boot. However, here's another area where you have to pay attention, and don't be fooled on this, because for the first time ever, we are actually seeing chip differences between different M4 iPad Pro models. Now, this is dependent on what storage tier you get. So if you get 256 gigabytes or the 512 gigabyte version of the iPad Pro, you're actually getting a binned M4 chip with a 9-core CPU instead of the full 10-core. And it's not missing a high-efficiency core, it's missing a performance core. I don't know how much of an effect that will take on, high-demanding performance-related tasks, but it could end up making a bit of difference if it's missing one of the performance cores. Not only that, but like last year, these storage tiers also come with just 8 gigabytes of memory. The 1TB and 2TB version of the iPad Pro get the full 10-core CPU chip with the full 4 high-performance cores and 6 energy-efficient cores, and they sport double the memory at 16 gigabytes. So not only do you have to make a decision on whether or not you want the faster M4 chip in the iPad Pro compared to the M2 in the Air, but you also have to decide if you want to spend even more money on a higher storage configuration for better chip performance. This is something I really can't help you with too well because I don't have these models to review. I don't know how big of a difference that makes, but it's something you really need to consider in the ordering process, because don't forget, you can order an iPad Pro right now, and these things aren't even shipping until the 15th, so reviews are gonna take a little bit of time to come out. All right, let's move on to something that's not as important and something that's actually pretty similar: the cameras. That's because Apple actually dropped one of the cameras from the iPad Pro. They no longer have an ultra-wide angle option, so both the Air and the Pro now just have a single 12 megapixel wide-angle camera. It looks like it's the same exact one on both models. And both the Air and Pro now have the front-facing camera oriented in the landscape position. However, there are some small differences here, once again. First of all, the front camera on the iPad Pro, it's a true depth camera with Face ID, while the Air doesn't get the true depth sensor, and it's sticking with the fingerprint reader Touch ID sensor on the power button. Second, the iPad Pro rear camera has a LiDAR scanner, which will support better depth mapping and augmented reality camera features, and it also has a flash on the back, which Apple says will be helpful for scanning documents. The iPad Pro also gets better speakers. It has a 4-speaker system compared to the iPad Air's 2-speaker system. Now, one area where it doesn't appear to be a difference is with battery life, but this is just going on Apple's own ratings here, and they kind of rate all the iPads as 10 hours of usage. For some reason, iPad ratings have never changed. Like, the iPhone battery rating has changed constantly over the years. The MacBook ratings have changed, but the iPad has had a 10-hour battery life rating since the first one. So that's interesting. And I kind of look at it and go, is that true? Are all these battery life, really the same over all these models over all these years? Maybe, maybe not. Finally, the accessories. This one is tricky for me because during the presentation, I assumed that all the new accessories would work for both the new iPad Pro and the iPad Air. And that's not exactly the case. So here's the good news. The Apple Pencil Pro with haptic feedback and this barrel roll feature will work for both the Air and the Pro. The bad news? Well, if you already had an Apple Pencil 2 and wanted to save money when you're upgrading to one of these new devices, well, that won't work on either the new Air or the new Pro. I assume this has something to do with the way the Apple Pencil now charges, with maybe the camera being in the landscape orientation, but yeah, you can't use your old Apple Pencil 2 on the new iPads, and that kind of stinks. Another bit of good news is that Apple released a new Magic Keyboard for the iPad Pro that has a new aluminum and fabric design, finally a set of function key rows at the top, and a new glass trackpad with haptic feedback that will make it feel like a MacBook. The bad news? It doesn't support the iPad Air for some unknown reason. So if you want the new keyboard, you have to pick up an iPad Pro. If not, you can still use the older Magic Keyboard design. So if for some reason you already have one and you wanted to save money, it should carry over to your new iPad Air, unlike the Apple Pencil. So that's a mixture of good and bad news. Okay, I think we covered all the major differences between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. Now, which one should you buy? Well, let me be honest. If they were both priced the same, you'd go for the Pro. There'd be no reason to buy the Air. But hey, this is the real world, and the better product is more expensive. So the iPad Air, it starts at a reasonable $599 price point with 128 gigabytes of storage for the 11-inch and $799 for the 12.9-inch. I think these are both really good prices for these models, especially with the higher starting storage, because last year the Air only came with 64 gigabytes of starting storage, and let's be honest, that was just way too low for such a powerful computer, and it made it really hard to recommend. So yeah, this makes it a whole lot easier to recommend. Now, if you want to step up to the Pro, well, it's gonna cost you. It's gonna cost you a lot. The iPad Pro used to start at $799. But now it's getting a $200 starting price increase at $999. However, it does now start with 256 gigabytes of storage. So if you compare the M2 iPad Pro 256 gigabyte option, it's only a $100 price increase over last year's model. The bigger 13-inch iPad Pro starts at a whopping $1,300 though. Still, the main story here is that the iPad Air is much cheaper than the Pro. It is $400 less than the Pro. Even if we bump it up to the same starting storage at 256 gigabytes, the Air still is $300 less in price. That is a big, big gap. So to me, the question isn't, should I buy an iPad Pro over the iPad Air? Because the iPad Air looks like the starting point. And the real question that you should ask yourself is it worth spending an extra $400 for the iPad Pro? For some people, there's no way. Those features aren't going to be worth it enough. And for most people, they'll probably pick the iPad Air for the better value. However, here is where I would base my decision on if upgrading to the iPad Pro is worth it for you. The first thing is something I already covered and told you was the biggest reason already in the beginning, because it is the biggest reason. The OLED display on the iPad Pro is a big step up from the iPad Air, and it's going to be the biggest difference between both iPads in real-world usage. If you value display quality, if you know you value display quality, and it's worth $400 more to get the OLED display with 120 Hertz, then yeah, you already know who you are. You kind of don't need my advice. But that is the big reason. If you don't know what the display differences are, if you want to wait for these to come out in store and look at them side by side and determine if it's a big deal to you, then you should probably do that, because $400 is not something most people should spend on a whim. The second reason to upgrade to the Pro is the M4 chip. Now, for most people, I don't think these hardware upgrades will probably matter all that much. The M2 and the iPad Air is obviously going to be fine. More than fine for what most people use an iPad for. And really, the software at this point doesn't seem like it's going to take major advantage of the M4 chip. Still, if you are a power iPad user who uses more advanced programs like Photoshop, Illustrator, Procreate, Final Cut Pro, Logic, or whatever, then you may want to consider getting the iPad Pro for better performance. Also, if you're interested in future AI features being faster, or maybe even exclusive to the new M4 iPad Pro, then again, you may want to get a Pro for future-proofing. But this is kind of hard to recommend because we really haven't seen what Apple is doing with their AI features quite yet. So if you're not in a rush to buy an iPad Pro, again, a smart move might be waiting a month to see what Apple has in store for the next version of iPadOS and see if there's some sort of software upgrade that makes the iPad Pro's M4 chip really worth it. To me, the OLED display and the M4 chip are really the two major deciding factors I would make on whether or not you want the iPad Pro over the Air. And then I would treat every other small upgrade that we mentioned, like the Face ID camera, the thinner design, the lighter weight, the new Magic Keyboard, and so on, as kind of like a nice little bonus upgrade, but they're not the main reasons to spend that much more money on a Pro over an Air. Now, even though this video mostly focused on the Air versus the Pro, don't forget, there is an entire iPad lineup out there, and even at $599, the Air might seem a little costly to you. So if it does, I would recommend checking out the regular iPad. It has a very similar design to the Air, a very capable A14 chip, USB-C, its own unique keyboard design, and it now has a lower starting price at just $350, which makes it a really easy recommendation for someone looking for a lower price iPad without all the bells and whistles. You also have the iPad mini in the lineup, which honestly, logically, seems like a bad deal. It hasn't been updated since 2021. It still has the same $499 starting price point, but to be fair to the mini, it does have a better display than the regular iPad, still has Apple Pencil 2 support, even has a faster A15 chip over that regular iPad, and let's be honest, it's just an entirely different philosophy when it comes to the iPad mini. It's a very unique experience that focuses purely on being a tablet in a very small form factor. So while it's a little hard to recommend the mini based on how long it's taken to get an update for it, it may kind of be like the only iPad form factor you want to buy because it is very unique. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because if I'm being honest, even though I want an upgrade for it, the current version still works fine. All right, but those are pretty much the major differences between the iPad Pro and the iPad Air and the entire iPad lineup this year. And it is a very interesting lineup, again, with more iPad choices than ever before. I really hope this video helped you out in making a decision. If it did, please leave me a like. If you want to see a full review of the new iPad Air or the new iPad Pro to see if it's truly worth it, get subscribed because that's coming soon. And let me know, what do you plan on getting? An iPad Air or an iPad Pro or maybe a regular iPad or an iPad mini? Really interested to see what most people are leaning towards. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.